So we're going to be joined now by Jeffrey DeWitt, who's the Chief Financial Officer for the District of Columbia. As I said in my opening, they have been doing some really innovative, great work around asset inventory. So we're going to give Jeffrey a chance to talk about that, and then we'll do some Q&A. Sorry.
If you don't mind, I'm going to stand and give you this presentation on the need for asset management systems, asset inventories, and long-range capital planning. And this is a topic that we've been working on for the last 3 years. It's really hard to get people to understand the importance of it. So the best way to get your head around asset management is potholes. Imagine a world without potholes. Everybody can relate to potholes, and we have the most interesting man in the world as our first slide. And he says, basically, I don't usually hit potholes, but when I do, I blow my tires out. Now, that is, the point of potholes is, if you've ever driven anywhere, and I was coming home from Minneapolis, last night from a meet that my nephew had at the Naval Academy in gymnastics, and I was merging onto 295, and I really could relate to this presentation when my teeth jammed together as I hit a pothole merging onto the 295. And the point of it is, we can all relate that we've all clenched our teeth, we've all grabbed the steering wheel hard, and that's really what asset inventory is about, is how do you get state of good repair on your infrastructure. So imagine a world without potholes. I'm going to show you how you can get to that imaginary world and what it looks like. So these are some pictures. You can see going down one of their avenues, you can see the Capitol in the background. We have potholes in DC. You may not be aware of that, but we do have them here. And we're working to fix them. And then the other mine that's here is, imagine the pothole truck can't fix the potholes because it fell in a pothole. So potholes can really be a big challenge for dealing with infrastructure in the United States, and anyone on the East Coast can relate to this. So I'm trying to drill the pothole concept in your mind because that is what asset inventories can help fix at some point. It's not just about roads. Not everybody wants a world without potholes. The auto repair people like potholes, and tire companies like potholes. So not everybody wants us to get rid of all the potholes. But when we do, we can maybe make them make a little less money. I know when I was a CFO, Chief Financial Officer in Phoenix, Arizona I was there for 24 years. You don't have a lot of potholes there because you don't have freezing and thawing going on. And I go here and I buy a new car as I get here. I've been here 4 years. And the very first thing the car dealership says, would you like to buy rim bend insurance? I'm like, why would I buy rim bend insurance? Because you live in Washington, D.C. That's why you want to buy that. And I understood why after hitting a few potholes. So not everybody likes a world without potholes, but we're going to show how to get here. What does that look like? Pennsylvania Avenue, right before the inauguration. What do we do every 4 years? We scrape the street all the way to the core. And we rebuild it every 4 years, so it looks really, really pretty for the inauguration. That's right before the inauguration. That's what a world without potholes looks like. It's obviously very expensive, and you have to prioritize it. So that is what the world looks like. That's what we're trying to get to. Now, how do you get there? There are 4 things you got to do on asset inventory to get it to a world without potholes, a world where your schools are maintained, your roofs don't leak, whatever it is, your physical plants don't break down in air conditioning in the summer, whatever it is. And the first thing you got to do, and you heard the panel before me talk about that, you got to know what you have. You have to inventory your assets. And I'm going to talk in a few minutes about what we've done in DC to do that. You got to know what you have. How many fire engines do you have? How many police cars do you have? How many handicap lifts do you have on the buses? When are they going to wear out? What's the quality of the roof of your buildings? What is how's the fire station looking? You might have a brand new fire truck, but you have a fire station falling down. What's the quality of your schools? You need to know every single asset you have. And 2 years ago, we didn't know anything. A year ago, we had 14% of our assets inventory. Now we're at 96%. So 96% of our inventories, we do know where believe it or not, DC knows where the potholes are. It's just a matter of funding and crews and time to do that. We know the quality of our roads and our streets and our alleys. We know schools that need to be fixed and what priority they need to be in. We know how many hours are on our fire trucks and how old they are and how much it costs to fix them to go forward. That's the first thing you have to do. Inventory your assets, and that is what rarely exists in municipal and state government that we all have to do if we really want to fix our infrastructure. The next thing you got to do is what's the quality? You have to do condition assessments. We've done condition assessments on all our roads, streets, and sidewalks and alleys. We have many of our buildings going through condition assessments now. You may not know this, but the District of Columbia, it's a city, state, county, and a school district. It has the responsibilities of a state, a city, a county, and a school district. And we own National Stadium. We're the owner of National Stadium. We know when the seats need to be replaced. We know exactly when the physical plant needs to be replaced. We know everything about that stadium because we have an asset inventory on it. We've done a condition assessment on the building. We know the needs for the next 20 years. The convention center, if you've ever been there, we know all the details about it so that we know exactly what it takes to do that. So we're in the process of getting all those done. So once you know what you have and what its condition is, how do you prioritize what to do? What's more important, fixing the road or putting in a new bridge? What's more important, a school or a fire station? So we actually have a process in place. There's a scorecard that if you are one of the 80 agencies in the District of Columbia, every single one of your project goes through a scoring. There's 20 criteria on it. We have this report at cfo.dc.gov. You can see the report, and in the back is a scoring table. Every single project gets a score, and the score determines what the ranking is of its funding, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. So you have to prioritize because you cannot afford to do everything. There is far more needs, I don't care what city you are, there's far more needs that people want than the money you have, and you got to make those decisions. So then the last thing you got to do, how much money do I have? Well, that's easy for me. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of the District of Columbia, so I know how much money we have. I know how many bonds we can sell in the next 5 to 6 to 10 years. I know how much pay-as-you-go or cash funding we have. I know how much federal grants we don't have. That's a message to anybody listening to this, and how many more we need. And so we can figure all that out. So you have to know these 4 things. You got to know what you have, what's the quality of it, what's its condition, how do you prioritize it, and how much money do you have? Now let's go to the next slide and show you this. This is actually the funding availability for the District of Columbia for capital assets for the next 6 years. So you can see we have over $1 billion of capacity for the most part each and every year. And this is a line that we need to fit all those assets under. All those projects have to fit under that line. Those are dollars. On the line represents millions of billions of dollars that we have each and every year that we can afford. Now, why does it go down the last year? Because we're nearing our debt capacity. We have only an amount of debt that we can issue. We're nearing our capacity. We'll be paying some off in a few years, and that will go back up. But that's why the last year goes down. So that is the funding that we have. Now, this next slide looks like the really ugly tie my mother made me wear when I was little during the springtime. So that's an issue that I have to deal with for therapy or whatever. But each one of those bars is an asset. Each one of those is an asset. So take a look at sort of the purple one that's rather thick. I don't know if the pointer works here, and I'll walk over here if it's okay. If you look at this bar right here, that's Banneker High School. That's Coolidge High School. Those are specific assets that are in this system. We have a system called Capital Asset Replacement Scheduling System, CARS. Capital Asset Replacement Scheduling System. It's a system we have that every single asset's in there, every single project's in there, every single project is scored and ranked. And what happens is the number 1 ranked project goes under the first year, that first set of bars, until it fills up. Then when it fills up, the next projects go into the second year till they fill up. The one on the end here that actually has a bigger arrow on it is what we can't afford. So during the next 5 years, 5 to 6 years, we can afford about $6.7 billion of projects. But we cannot afford 4.2. So that chart actually is not to scale. See the arrow going up? It would go off the screen. We have almost 40% of the things we would like to do, need to do, we cannot afford to do under current resources. Half of that is deferred maintenance. Half of it is new projects. So so you can see every one of those little bars is a project. You can actually go into the system, click on the bar. It will tell you what the project is. It will tell you what its score is in terms of its priority. It will tell you what it costs to defer maintenance on it. So every time you delay one of these projects, it costs more. So deferred maintenance is built in here too. So if I were to say I'm not going to do that unfunded bar for 10 years, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger because it actually escalates based on the deferred maintenance impact of it. If I don't fix a pothole, the pothole becomes a road scrape. If I don't paint a bridge, the bridge has to be replaced. So all these things are factored into this model so you can see how it works. So that is sort of the concept. You take that bar of revenue that you have, or funding you have, and you place each individual project in there until you're done, and you have a stack at the end. Now, asset inventories are the beginning, but now you got to kind of combine long-range capital planning, because you're going to just pretend those go away. That's what we used to do. We used to just fund it till 6, send them off a cliff, not worry about it. How are you going to address it? Are you going to hope the federal government comes into D.C. and gives us $4.2 billion for assets? Personally, I'm not going to wait for it. They can't even get the government running today, so I'm not going to wait. We need to figure this out our own way. So what do we do? Well, what happened, and I'll explain this chart in just a minute. We had this in the strategic plan for the Chief Financial Officer's office. We're an independent office separate from the mayor and council. Actually, my position is approved by the mayor, approved by council, and confirmed by Congress. So I'm a residual of the 1990s bankruptcy that DC had. And it's an independent office, which allows us to do these types of things. And the council, after we proposed dealing with infrastructure, passed a law that says we have to do this report every year. So council actually passed a law that requires this inventory, maintenance inventory every year. So it's now into law. And then last year, they said, we want to deal with this unfunded inventory, and they passed a law that said we're going to increase our pay-as-you-go funding, because we're at our debt limits, every year gradually until we get to annual depreciation. So think about it. We are going to pay cash amounts that equals the annual depreciation of all our assets, which is about $400 million a year. So that line chart at the top is that gradual increase over time of increasing how much cash we take out of our growth and put it into infrastructure, which makes infrastructure a priority in terms of DC government, because we want to be a state of good repair throughout the district. What happens with that, when you take this chart over here, this is the bar that's unfunded, and you start increasing that pay-as-you-go, you start increasing that line up a little bit. So that line gets a little bit higher. And so as you're dealing with that over time and you get to that point, you'll see the bottom chart shows you how much that unfunded capital program goes down. By 2028, by putting this law in place and gradually increasing our pay-as-you-go, we will be able to afford to have all of our projects into a state of good repairs. So what's happening? We're paying off our debt. Lots of debt. We have about $10 billion of outstanding bonds. We're paying that off. As we pay it off, we're repurposing it into infrastructure. As the pay-as-you-go goes up, we're focusing it in infrastructure. And so we use an optimization model called What's Best. It actually takes all this and determines the most efficient and effective way to take care of that big stack of unfunded projects. And by 2028, we can have the entire District of Columbia into a state of good repair if we continue to follow this legislation. So that's really the fifth step. You'll see the title at the top, the fifth step. The fifth step is, once you figure out your asset inventory issues and your unfunded liabilities, come up with a plan to fix it, no matter how long it is. We can't do it in 5 or 6 years, but we can do it in 10 years. And we can do it in 10 years by taking those unfunded projects and placing them in there. And again, the more we wait, the more they get expensive, but you can actually come up with a plan to do that. And that's what the District of Columbia has done. So the question for our elected officials and for all of us in the District of Columbia is, a world without potholes by 2028, it is possible. It is feasible. It is achievable, as long as we continue with our own laws that we passed on how you get pay-as-you-go funding going in, paying your debt off, and as you pay it off, repurposing it into infrastructure. Now, it was right before we actually made a similar presentation last Thursday to the rating agencies and institutional investors at an institutional conference that we had, Institutional Investor Conference. We're going to be selling about $5 billion in GO bonds over the next 5 years. And so we were talking to our large investors and to the rating agencies, going over this, helping them understand this. And the point I made is, when most people don't even know. I would say most cities in the country have no idea what their deferred maintenance is. They have no idea what their at backlog is. Ignorance is bliss, because you don't have to do anything. But we can no longer be blessed here. We now know exactly what our challenges are. We know exactly what we have to do. And it's about making infrastructure a priority. This same tool, you may or may not know this same tool we did for Metro about 2 years ago. So the numbers you're seeing in the paper about Metro deferred maintenance, $15 billion, need $500 million a year, dedicated tax in the region, that came out of this model from this analysis. That we worked with Metro to do this, to help them understand what is their backlog of deferred maintenance. How much do they need to be putting in to make their system safe and reliable and to a state of good repair? And then you don't just finish with saying we got a $15.5 billion Metro unfunded problem. We then went in and figured out what do you need to get there. And it's a dedicated funding source of $500 million. So this tool has been used not only for DC, but in the region, and we are just getting started. We got the assets inventoried, we're doing condition assessments, but it is just driving it. We by law have to update this every year. So if we do something in DC that makes this worse, the report next year is going to say, world without potholes, 2030. World without potholes, 2032. I mean, we're going to keep going with this. But the point of this is, I think as all of us in this room are trying to get this across, is how do you explain this to the public? How do you get people to understand what that looks like? And what we found is what everybody can relate to is a pothole, because we've all hit one sooner or later. So thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
That was great. Thank you. You know, I've got to say that having lived in the D.C. area for 25 years now, it seems like Congress and D.C. are everyone's favorite punching bags. But then you hear about something like this, where you all really are a national leader, and the information you have will enable D.C. to really potentially have the best infrastructure system in the country. So this obviously required a lot of strong commitment from the mayor's office on down. When did this start? How long did you get, and how long did it take you to get to where you are now?
So I was appointed the independent chief financial officer about 4 years ago, and my very first meeting was within council member Mayor Bowser, who's now the mayor. She was a council member then. And I sat down, and I had not yet accepted the nomination, and she said, well, Mr. DeWitt, I know you're from Phoenix, Arizona, but you know, we have a $25 billion backlog in Metro, and I got about $6 billion of schools I'd like to do. What are you going to do about that? And my first thing was probably go back to Phoenix and just not come here, because that sounds like a little too big of a problem. But that sort of spurred on building a strategic plan for the CFO's office. And two gentlemen who are here today, Dave Clark and Daryl Street, actually, I gave them an assignment. I said, I want an asset inventory because we got to start there. And when they came back, I'm like, wow, I didn't expect you to do all this too. But you know, when you give really smart people assignments, and then they build a team together, and then there's a partnership done with the mayor's office. And now when you want your funding every year, you have to have your assets in the inventory. You have to have them scored and ranked. And I walked in on a meeting last week with about 25 people in the meeting, and Dave Clark was in there, and they were scoring them and deciding who got funded and who doesn't get funded. So you do not get your capital projects funded if you're not in the inventory. And you do not get, if you don't get ranked, it doesn't go to the mayor to take a look. So it is that partnership with the mayor's office, all the agencies, and again, we're a city, state, county, and school district, so we kind of got them all together. But before that, there were probably 80 agencies and probably 50 different asset inventories, or not at all. And now they all have to do that. So they now know if they want project funding, they have to go through this process. And that sort of hammer and carrot both at the same time really made that take off.
That's great. So if you've got, I mean, our hope in doing this event today was to spread the gospel, if you will, and thanks to our first panel, that this is it is doable, but it takes a lot of time and a big investment. If you're a municipal leader sitting out there watching our webcast, hopefully there's lots of them, what is the starting point? This seems so overwhelming.
We started with a pilot because, you know, this is hard to get your head around. So we started with a pilot tool, an asset inventory tool. We started with a few agencies and kind of did a proof of concept. So we did it where people could see what you can find out, what you can know. And obviously DDOT, Department of Transportation here, is one of the ones that had the better information, but it wasn't necessarily being integrated and used in a way that makes it work. So that proof of concept is where we started out, so people could get their head around it and understand it. But we have really 4 people that they do this a lot. I mean, it takes a dedicated staff, and I know some of the other places obviously have dedicated folks, but you need somebody to be in charge of it. And you need to have a commitment from the agencies and from the leadership of that region or that government that understands how you do this. But how do we ask Congress for an infrastructure bill when we don't even know what we need? I mean,
Right.
we sort of pretend we know, but until you've really figured out that your fire truck is 35 years old and not yet an antique, but you're using it to fight fires, and it really needs to be replaced, and you're spending more maintaining it every year than it does to make payments on a new one. Until you know those types of things, how do you go ask the federal government for an infrastructure bill to help us out? Every city needs assistance on infrastructure. It's overwhelming. We're a city of 700,000 people that has a $10 billion infrastructure need, over $10 billion that we know about. And that's a big, heavy lift that we all have to figure out how to do.
So this obviously required the participation of all the agencies, and you did say if they've got an infrastructure project, it's got to be ranked and on. But was it hard to get their buy-in?
Not after the first year. I think the first year it was a little, not that it wasn't easy, not that it was easy, don't get me wrong. But I think when people realize you're doing this to help them, you're doing this to get that project that's been unfunded for years ranked in an apolitical way. So this is an analytical tool. These scoring will go to the mayor in a couple weeks, and she will see the ranking and scoring of all these and what the process shows. And we did it last year too, and it didn't change that much. It is really truly the ones that are the most priority to get done. Schools get a premium score, and they get a premium score because if schools don't work in DC, people are going to move out.
Right.
So it makes sense, and it is. But there are hard choices between deferred maintenance and cutting a ribbon for a new place. We like to cut ribbons.
Right.
But it does make those maintenance projects on the same scoring basis as a new project, and it helps you understand those difficult choices. And that's what this is about, difficult choices.
So one thing I noticed, because DC WASA is a separate entity,
Right.
And there's a lot of talk about coordinating better in terms of, let's say you have to dig up a road, that's when you put in your new water line, that's when you put in your new broadband fiber, and there's some coordination. What kind of conversations do you have with those folks?
So that's the importance of a tool like this. So we had an investor conference last Thursday. DC Water was there with us. They're a separate entity. They sell bonds separately. So it was DC Water, the District of Columbia, the Metropolitan Airport Authority, and Metro. Oh. We were all together for 2 days talking to investors about our projects, and we introduced this concept to, now Metro knows about it because we worked with them on it. We introduced the concept to DC Water and to there. So this tool, there's no reason it can't be used by all the region and then integrated together. But your point is, the most frustrating thing, I think your point is, a water main breaks, and then 3 months later, DC comes in and fixes the road but there is much better coordination on that than there was several years ago.
Okay.
And this tool will actually take it to a whole nother level as we learn to use it together.
That's great. And you had mentioned too that the schools get #1 priority because
they get a premium score.
Premium
they get a score.
Right, because otherwise people leave the city.
Yeah.
What other criteria, how did you set them?
So there is you can go to the report, again, it's on cfo.dc.gov. I think it's page 43. You can actually see the scorecard. There's 19 criteria on there, and it has scoring from a premium for schools and things like that to does this help offset operations expenses? In other words, it's so expensive to run that fire truck that we need to replace it. That's actually a scoring criteria. So all 19 criteria are on there, and when you get done, you add them up, you'll get a total score. And the highest ranked one will be the first one that falls into that ugly looking tie thing I mentioned earlier, in terms of which one falls under that category. But there's 19 criteria, at least there currently is. That can be changed every year. But the point is, everybody gets scored on the same basis. And every agency can see exactly why they got the score they did and know why they didn't get funding because we don't have enough in 5 years, but we have enough in 8 years or whatever it is.
Okay. So the funding is obviously the big elephant in the room for the federal infrastructure plan or whatever is coming down the pike here. And it's impressive to see that the district has committed to increasing funding to address that depreciation that you had mentioned. They clearly made it a priority and said, you know, we're going to modernize the infrastructure. And what is, I guess I'm just curious, how did that come about? And how do you, if you're in another city where, you know, we hear about it constantly, where, particularly with water, if you want to raise rates, you get significant pushback. Any tax increases is a huge pushback. So how did DC make that commitment to provide the resources?
So it's the issue of, you know, it was probably 4 years ago, I was having a discussion with the chairman of the council, and because we're a city, state, county, and school district, that's like talking in a state to the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House and the head of the Senate. It's all in one entity. And he said, I'm going to put a law in that requires you to update this report every year. And I said, be careful what you ask for, because now you're going to know exactly what your problems are, and you're going to be faced with the challenges of priorities that you don't know about right now. And when they saw this thing last year, we had said in the previous study that they needed to put $325 million more into PAYGO every year immediately if they wanted to get it done in 10 years. And the legislature looked at it, and the mayor signed it, was, well, we want to graduate it up so we're not taking away from other programs, because capital competes with programs. That's the reality of it is, when you got to make a debt service payment, where are you going to get the money from? It might come out of another program that you really want to do. And so they came up with a proposal or legislation, as you saw the graph, ramps up slowly.
Right.
But the concept is, if you're not funding depreciation at pay-as-you-go, things are starting to fall apart. That's the minimum requirement. When I was a CFO in Phoenix, the water utility was under the city, like San Diego is, and we ramped up PAYGO to depreciation levels, and they went from a single A to a AAA rated water utility as they did that. And they have the funding in Phoenix. They had to have rate increases to do it, but they now have the funding to maintain their water and sewer infrastructure, because they started funding PAYGO levels or cash levels up to depreciation levels. The same concept works here. You could accelerate it faster and get to state of good repair quicker. But this is financial. The reality of it is, once you do that, now you got to marshal resources. You got to have enough people to fix the potholes. You got to have enough people to scrape the streets. That's the second, maybe that's the sixth step, and by ramping it up slowly, it gives the city, the district, time to ramp up the resources necessary to deploy the resources to stay to a state of good repair.
Well, I think shining a light on it is so key to this, because so much of this is the public doesn't really grasp that when a water main breaks, or they take significant resources to repair all of that, and that's just to have the system we now have, not to have a better system.
I mean, why do water mains break when it gets cold? Because they're not in a state of good repair.
Right.
They shouldn't be breaking. They're and probably the ones that were breaking were probably put in the early 1900s, be my guess, if you were to look at the asset inventory and look at the age. So, potholes, broken water mains, leaking roofs are deferred maintenance. We're spending billions of dollars repairing our schools because we did not maintain them.
Right.
They're new projects because in our capital program, because they had to be completely rebuilt from scratch. That's deferred maintenance. That's what it looks like. We can't afford to do that again. There's too many needs going on in the country and in our cities. So if we can maintain them better, it's cheaper in the long run. And it's like the convention center, National Stadium, all those things. If you maintain them, you don't have to tear them down and rebuild them completely.
Right.
They'll last forever if you do them right.
And because it is one of the struggles those of us involved in the infrastructure debate here on the federal level have, is you're not getting that public outcry. People talk about it, you talk about it in terms of economic development and the jobs, but you're not getting this huge influx of letters from people back home and saying we need new infrastructure, because we're not giving them that kind of information.
I mean, the one that we can most visually, the Arlington Bridge. Everybody knows where the Lincoln Memorial is in Arlington Cemetery. And you'll see that's a federal, not DC government.
Right, no, it is.
I'll make that clear. That bridge wasn't funded until last year, and it is 3 or 4 years from being a footbridge because they didn't maintain it. They didn't go underneath and paint it and do all the things for it. And the bridge that connects Virginia to the nation's capital was in danger of falling into the Potomac River because it was poorly maintained. If you had painted it and maintained it, it would have been probably had another 20 years of life on it. Now we got to completely replace it because we didn't pay attention to our infrastructure. And that's across, it's not just DC, it's not just Virginia, it's a United States issue. You can look at airports, all these areas, but you can't figure that out unless you do the 4 steps we talked about. You got to know what you have, you got to know its condition, you got to know what the priorities of fixing it are, and you got to know how much money you have. And then you can begin to fix the problem.
Well, I think it's important to know it's it's ongoing, because even once you get to your crazy time, not the unpaid portion, you're still more projects are gonna come online.
Correct. You have to do it
as you deal with that. Right. So there really does need to be more of a vision, both at municipal, state, and even the federal level.
You have to put long-range financial and capital planning with asset inventories, and you got to put them together. You can't just do one. You got to do both. And you got to do it every year, because as you said, you know what happened, the way that model works, if one of those in that big unfunded list suddenly broke, it would go into the years, and you would, if you were watching the computer model, all those little colors would start moving around everywhere, and the other ones would pop into the unfunded list because that one got funded.
Okay.
But that's the tool that allows you to see if you accelerate something, something else has to give unless you put more money into it. And that tool allows you to do that.
Does DC have a separate capital budget versus, or is it all?
We have a, as part of the mid-1990s sort of federal control board period, we are required, and this is best practices, so the people of that control board really knew what they were doing. We do a 4-year budget, really. We have a 4 or 5-year financial plan where we not only budget the current year, we have to make sure we have adequate resources for the next 4 years, and the CFO has to certify that before it can become the budget. So an independent office, which is our office, has to certify that. And then they do a 6-year capital plan that goes with that we also have to certify that we stay within our debt limits, that we stay within our federal funding that we receive, and then we stay within the resources that we're putting into it. So we have a 4-year operating budget and a 6-year capital budget we do every year. And this tool is part of what feeds the 6-year capital budget. The 6-year capital budget is set by this tool.
Do you think this would be, well, it might help more states and cities get to a capital budget if they don't have one now?
Not a real prioritized capital budget.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm going to open it up now to questions from the crowd. So just raise your hand and we'll get you a mic over there. We have someone in the back. Thanks, Dora.
Thank you. Luke Lorenz, the Nonpartisan Policy Alliance. I'd like to ask, as you're looking through these assets, particularly those that end up in the unfunded column, do you identify any assets or categories of assets that might be ideal for public-private partnerships or any type of funding mechanism other than issuing bonds and debt financing?
That is a great question, and I feel like I planted you there. But I didn't. When we're scoring the projects, they actually get a P3 designation or not. So as we're going through all these projects, we say, is that eligible, that has a cash flow that goes with it or revenue source that goes with it? Or could the private sector do better? And actually in the report is a table that lists all those projects in that list that are P3 eligible. So there's about over $1 billion, well over $1 billion of projects that we are considering to go to P3. And we have our P3 office here today. We have a public-private partnership office, the mayor does, and they work with us to go through that list. We give it to them as out of this project, and they use that to determine what P3 projects that they can do. So it's another outcome. When you're looking at everything, you might as well ask those questions along the way and say, here's a P3 opportunity that you might want to do to help deal with that unfunded list.
Yeah, and I think, again, that's just another way that DC really is pushing the envelope on this, is that they do that P3 screen. It was one of the recommendations of our council. Not that every project can be a P3, but given the gap, you got to put every possible tool on the table. So, sorry, standing up?
Hi, how are you? Tracy Gordon from the Urban Institute. I'm wondering, what was the reaction of the credit rating agency analyst that you spoke to about this? As you know, there was a dust-up a few years ago about GASB 34 making disclosures like this standard for local governments, and there was a strong reaction against doing that. But it strikes me as a state and local finance person that having this information for DC is wonderful. DC is also in the fortunate position of having pay-as-you-go revenue to take care of these needs, but there are a number of other jurisdictions for which we don't have this information, and they might be in more precarious financial situations.
You know, we struggled when this report came out for the first time 2 years ago. Are we going to get a downgrade because we now know we have $4 billion of unfunded projects, and are we going to get punished for it? So we kind of did a roadshow with the rating agencies. And we also, you know, when the report was done, the first phase, I saw this big list. I'm like, wow, what do we do now? And so it's like, well, we need, if we're going to publish this report, we better have a solution and start the process of a solution. Because if you just say you have a big problem and you're the only one that knows it, you could get punished for it. And that was a concern. We had a really candid back and forth last Tuesday with one of the rating analysts from there, and they see it as a positive now. They see knowing what you have, but planning to do something about it. And one of the questions of one of the panelists at the conference last week was, shouldn't you get a premium for doing this? And I say yes, but they haven't done that yet. We haven't got that premium yet. But it is something that the comment back from the rating analyst was, we're trying to figure out how to give credit for this because it is such an important step, and we're struggling with it ourselves because most people have no idea. But if they don't have an idea, how's the rating analyst have an idea? And so they're struggling with this concept. This is not new, but sort of taking it to this level is you know, you heard from the earlier panel, they're all on their way there or there. And you know, we're just fortunate again that all of our agencies have to do this. Where San Diego is going, you're going one agency at a time as you try to get people on board of the importance of it. But when it is required to get funding, people pay attention to it, and they like it now. They actually like the process now.
Any, up here?
Good morning. I'm Manuel Vega. I'm an independent consultant in P3 and infrastructure, and I'm intrigued by this capital asset replacement scheduling system, in the sense that we know that we basically manage by deferred maintenance, and we have assets that are beyond their economic service life, but we know we're not going to get the money, so we only ask the minimum to keep them going. How does this funding depreciation help the picture?
So what happened before we had this system was we just said, we don't have the money, don't ask. Right. So it was, we got $6 billion over 5 years. When we're out, don't ask, let's ignore it. We say, we want to know everything you need. We want to know all your deferred maintenance. We want to know all your new projects. No funding constraints are allowed in the process. We want to know everything you need, everything we need to do, and we'll figure it out. So the tool helps, again, prioritize it, takes the unfunded list, does a longer range plan than the 6 years required by federal law under the Home Rule Act for DC, and it takes it out to say, okay, when can you do it? When can you afford it? What's the impact of delaying it? And sometimes that analysis, the impact delaying it, says maybe we do need to do it sooner because it's going to break. The bridge is going to fall in if you don't fix it. So it is that unconstrained planning process that this tool provides, which helps you answer that question. But again, ignorance is bliss when you know what you really need to have. And you also, when you go through this, you find out that some agencies have ridiculous requests. That when you kind of hone through it and make it go through the scoring and make a look at it, you really don't need to do that. You need to do something else. Also in this tool is a cost scheduler, a new tool that's got added in the last year that actually makes sure that your estimates are realistic. You're not lowballing it to get it funded so that it's in the political process and then the costs go through the roof a few years later. So that's a new tool we've added to make sure that when an agency submits it, it's a real number, not a lowballed number to get it in the queue, so to speak. So there's lots of things that that are in here.
Over here, Ray?
Ray Kleitch, American Public Infrastructure, former credit analyst for Munis and
I'm sorry.
40-year banker. No, I chuckled when you were talking about the rating agencies because their knee-jerk reaction to GASB 34 and an inventory like this is to put it on the liability side,
Right.
and then score everybody on who has the worst liabilities. And as you know, with municipal credit and all sovereign credits, they give you no credit for your assets, but tally up all your liabilities, so your direct debt, your pensions, and now maybe GASB 34. Have you thought about taking this model and applying market values to enterprise assets, for instance? Obviously, assets that don't have revenues are less. I mean, some of your vacant land, you can go to market, roads and streets that don't have revenue associated, because one of the things that we're working on is transferring those assets to pension funds where they would get full market credit, assuming we get through the traps of GASB 48.
Well, we're at GASB 87 now, so
Yeah.
just to let you know, that's Government Accounting Standards Board for those of you that aren't accounting nerds. But no, we have not taken that next leap on that. We know what we have, and the next phase of this is actually getting it into our financial. We now have this. Now we need to get it reflected in our. It's not just a fixed asset inventory anymore. We have a tool beyond that. So our next phase is doing that. And I was at a presentation, there's a federal asset inventory thing to really talk about the next step. They're talking about the ability to put sensors on equipment so that it feeds into your asset inventory system and tells you when it's likely to break. So that's a leap we haven't taken yet, but there's other leaps we haven't taken yet, which is, market valuing it. We're just at the phase of OMG. We have $4.2 billion of unfunded liabilities. Let's come up with a funding solution. But I think things like that, things like using sensors to monitor your assets is another leap. We still have 4% of our assets today. We're at 96%. We got to finish that first. But you have to start somewhere, and then it gives you tools to do things like that you're saying. But no, we have not taken that leap yet.
No, that's it's an important one because aggregates, just pension and debt, is about $7 trillion for state and local government.
We're fully funded on pensions. Just so everybody know this, all right?
Exactly.
This is really important. D.C. is the only city, state, county, and school district in the country. Our retiree health care are 100% funded, and our pensions are fully funded. So Detroit, there's hope. I'm just saying, there's ways to do that.
That's great. And in the back?
But that allows us to do asset work because our pensions, we're not worrying about funding pensions. We can focus on assets. Other cities can't do that.
Hi, thank you very much. Rick Rybeck with Just Economics. Talking about funding solutions. If we're good in designing and maintaining and executing infrastructure, typically land near that infrastructure goes up in value. Metro, I think, cost about $10 billion to build. Estimates are that more than $10 billion in land value around the stations has been created by that service. However, only 10 to 20% of that is captured through the traditional property tax. So basically, we're giving away 80 to 90% of the value we create. And I'm wondering whether, in terms of funding solutions, you're looking at a more robust land value capture as a way to make infrastructure financially self-sustaining.
So I was at a conference, it was an international conference maybe a year ago, where that very topic came up, particularly places in South America and places like that actually do that. I'm going to be really pragmatic for a second. As we were going through the Metro analysis and we found out that there's $6 billion that there's no funding source available from any of the jurisdictions. DC's share of that's about $2.6 billion. That we don't have funding identified for Metro that needs to be addressed. And one of those we looked at was property taxes within a mile of Metro, where the property tax would be higher near Metro. That one has not gotten any legs so far. You can interpret why that may be. But property taxes escalation near Metro, sales taxes, income taxes, all those were looked at as ways to identify this over $6 billion in additional funding. But I think having a handle on your assets and what they're worth and what they cost gives you the ability to get to that next step. But I would say other parts of the world are way ahead of us, and I think you probably know that in terms of that value capture. And it's something that Loudoun County actually has tax increment financings around their metro stations because the Silver Line is new. So they're sort of doing that there, where they're capturing higher taxes near metro stations because it does make the property worth a lot more. The difficulty of it is, after it's been there a while, they would argue they're already paying higher taxes because the chief financial officer of the District of Columbia, that person that they don't like, is assessing their land too high near metro stations. I mean, so the values are already somewhat reflected in near metro stations. The buildings are worth more, and that shows up in the assessed valuations. But doing things like this gives you the ability to answer questions like that. But the United States is way behind in that particular area.
One more question.
Deborah Notman with the RAND Corporation. Could you say a little bit more about the analytical tool? Is this proprietary? Is it open source? Who developed it? How accessible is it to other communities? And,
so we did, again, a proof of concept. The tool we're using, and I'm not making an endorsement, although they probably would like me to, the tool we're using is called PowerPlan. And it's a asset inventory system that we're using that they have actually evolved with us, because we kind of been, it's one thing to have a tool, but when we started asking questions, well, we needed to track hours for a fire truck, not miles. They've actually been modifying it for us, and it's a commercially available product. It's called PowerPlan, and what's best is the optimizational tool we're using. People, banks and credit analysts are maybe familiar with that tool. Those together, and it's in our report. You can actually see the product we're using. I'm sure there's other products out there, but that one, they have really worked with us a lot to evolve the tool to deal with a city, county, state, and school district, which is unique in terms of what that, but they've been a great partner. But again, I'm sure there's other products out there that other places may be using. And I was intrigued by San Diego talking about integrating it in with their SAP financial system. We're in the process of replacing our financial system. That's an older one. It's one of the things on our plan that we got funding in that capital project for, by the way. It made the list. And integrating that together later will be the next step. But the Power Plan and What's Best are the two products or tools that we're using in this particular deal. Not endorsing them, just for the record. So.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Any more questions? Okay. Thank you. This was great, and I again really give you all credit for leading the way on it's seemingly non-headline worthy, but it really is. It's very, very.
That's a headline.
Yeah, it's an exciting tool, and we're thrilled that it's here in DC. So, thank you all for coming.